right. Hey, what's up, everyone? So I'm here with Heidi Priebe, and I'm actually really excited right now because Heidi and I actually used to do videos together a lot. If y'all don't remember, we were on SPA Sigma Personality Quotient on Facebook, and we also did a YouTube video back in 2017 when I actually met Heidi in New York at McDonald's. And we just spontaneously were like, yo, let's do a video. And we're like, how about let's do a video on, misconceptions and properly profiling people. I like alliteration. So, but it was a really good video. People still, watch it a lot to this day. And so if you haven't seen that one, check it out. But it's cool to now, like, it's almost 4 years later, and I'm back with Heidi right now. Writer of INFP Survival Guide, ENFP Survival Guide. Heidi is an ENFP herself, and she also has an ENFP and INFP Soul Boot Camp that she is running that we're going to be talking about in this video, as well as some ENFP misconceptions, or probably plenty of ENFP misconceptions. So this is going to be actually a really jam-packed video, and I'm excited. But Heidi, did you want to say anything before we got right into it?
No, I think you pretty much covered all the bases, actually. People always remember like way more than I remember when they talk about my career or whatever. But man, that brought me back to McDonald's in 2017, watching everyone like get their orders right in front of us while we were packed into this little booth making a video. That was a fun memory.
Yeah, absolutely. That was fun. Fun fact, we recorded a video last week on ENFP and ENFJ comparison and contrast. And so in that video, I was talking a lot about like spontaneity, and I was just about to quote unquote talk about how spontaneous it was that we decided to make that video at McDonald's. And I just think that, yeah, I just thought that was like funny because I was once again about to be like, oh, look, my SE was shining there a little bit.
Yeah, we talked a lot about like how our third functions are the ones we're so proud of.
Yeah, but okay, so before we get into the misconceptions on ENFPs, for those who don't even know what your soul bootcamp is, can you tell us a little bit or a lot of bit about that?
Yeah, I can tell you as much as you want. So basically the ENFP and INFP soul boot camps, I developed them last summer because I was getting frustrated. I'd gone kind of 2 years where I was studying a whole bunch of different wellness models. So my background is like, I have a psychology degree. I've done a lot of NLP, neuro-linguistic programming training. I'm a meditation teacher. I'm a health coach. I have like a lot of different kind of credentials in the wellness space, most of which I don't use. I just kind of thought it was fun to learn about these different modalities. But what I was consistently frustrated by was the fact that a lot of these modalities tended to cater to specific personality types almost accidentally. So it's like I'd be on these meditation retreats and I'd be, surrounded with a whole bunch of introverts who are like, this is so easy. And I'm like, man, for me, this is very difficult. Like I'm really having to kind of pull some tools out of my skill box that tend to come more naturally to other types. And same with like a lot of these different modalities that I was learning. So I was like, wouldn't it be cool if there was something that taught people who are more like me? So whether that means more extroverted or bigger perceivers or just giant feelers where it's like, man, your emotions get in the way of some of these things that they're suggesting when you read about like morning routines and like keeping things super consistent. But I never really found a resource that kind of catered it specifically to people like me. So I was like, well, my thing is always when something doesn't exist in the world that you want to see exist in the world, it's like, you got to make it. And at the time, I wasn't even feeling like that wasn't a direction I wanted to go. I never thought I would end up making online courses, which is ironic because it's like I've made them for other people and I've kind of worked as a freelancer in that space. But the idea just kept bothering me and bothering me and bothering me. And I was like, all right, I'm just going to sit down one day and start writing this and see where it goes. So I started writing the ENFP Soul Bootcamp. And it just it was just like this dam that came out of me that was like, okay, this is a whole bunch of information that's been marinating in my head forever on how to do lifestyle design as a non-TE Dom. Because so many of the things you read are like, okay, all you have to do is wake up at the same time every single day for the rest of your life. And I'm like, man, that is just bad advice for some people. So what the boot camps are about essentially is learning to recognize your energy and where it shows up for you and how you can work with it to kind of channel it in a way that actually works for you as either an ENFP or an INFP, because a lot of the advice out there is given by TJ types, especially in the wellness space. And it's like, that's going to work for maybe a week for us. And that can be a great week. And we can pull that week out of our butts like once a quarter and get really productive. But it's not going to be the thing that sustains us long term. So the boot camps are all about just learning to like recognize, accept, and then more efficiently work with the energy that you actually have.
That's awesome. That's really awesome. I feel like that's, of course, even the whole point of typology to begin with. Because I remember I used to speak to an ESFP friend of mine who, and I always use this example, she wanted to become like, she admired this ENTJ guy, and she was trying to do things like how he did so frequently. And she didn't know anything about type at the time, but I knew that, okay, that guy's an ENTJ and you're an ESFP. Coincidentally, they do share the same function. So it's like, okay, that works. And of course, you know, with a lot of these things that you're talking about, I feel like ESTJs a lot of times write them. So, you know, maybe that also plays a part, like where like, you know, there's probably ENFPs are trying to like match up to like an ESTJ type of energy. So it's kind of like the same thing. But what I told this ESFP friend of mine who was trying to mimic the ENTJ was that I can, you know, you could probably be trying to get from point A to point D, and you might succeed if you try to do it the same way that the other guy is doing it. However, it's probably going to be way more difficult for you than it is for him. And what if I just showed you a way to be able to get to that same point, but in a way more natural like sense for you? And so a lot of people, again, they like to think like, oh, you know, type is like limiting. It's saying that I can't do this. And to me, it's like, it's not necessarily that you can't do it, but there's more natural ways for you to be able to achieve something. Why not allow me to show you a more natural way to be able to get the same thing? You know, people, even these TE DOMs, they will a lot of times tell you not to work harder, but just work smarter. And so if you want to like achieve that goal, then the smartest thing to do is to understand like, okay, what are my capabilities? What am I most natural at? And you're trying to preserve energy whereas while you're at it. And so I feel like you having this soul camp, I'm assuming that it just frees so many NFPs from this, especially, you know, having the lower TE and everything, like, you know, oh man, I've been trying to live up to this. I've been trying to live up to that. I've been trying to like do this like my ISTJ mom and do that like my ENTJ father. And then it's just like, how about I just show you how you can achieve the same thing? And, you know, I'm guessing, you know, you as being the person that you are, you're still learning yourself. And so like, wow, let's all like learn and go through this together. And you probably have people, you know, in the boot camp who are even more older and more mature in certain areas that can also help teach the other NFPs. And I don't know, it just seems like, again, such an amazing atmosphere. I haven't been a part of it, although I did hear that a good INFJ friend of ours was able to sneak in. I was like, dang, I thought about that. I should have just went with it, but but anyway.
Yeah, there was.
Yeah, go ahead.
At the time we had a Slack channel. We were doing like a community around it. Now it's self-study, so we don't have a Slack community. But there was, I think, 3 people in that course that were not ENFPs the first time I ran it. So I was like, I guess I'll just make a little Slack channel for non-ENFPs to meet each other and hang out. But yeah, that was really funny and really sweet because like the mutual friend we have who joined was just really really wanting to learn more about her ENFP friends. And I was like, that's just so nice. Like, what a nice thing to do.
Yeah, I thought that was really awesome. But from all of that being said, so what would you say are some things that you took away from holding those boot camps? And I know that you have like, you know, a new season coming up soon too. Like, so what are some things that you're also looking forward to now this time around?
Yeah, well, it's interesting because as I said, like the first 2 times we ran it, it was live. So we had a lot of coaching calls and a lot of like kind of touch points with like our community, especially the second time we had calls every week and we had a Slack community. And what was really interesting was I kind of suspected this, but it ended up being the case. I think the thing most people took away from it is just that you have to accept the type that you are in order to get anything done. And that sounds so simple, but it's like we just see it play out over and over and over again, because the more we put these people in a room, like a Zoom room, I guess, and get them talking to each other and sharing their life experiences. And like we would run activities around like vulnerability and just sharing more of yourself, because FI really struggles with that. And you just see that the more people stop fighting who they are, which I think is something that a lot of NFPs have been doing their whole lives. Like I know I definitely have, because the world isn't necessarily super set up for NFPs. The more brilliance emerges. Like I think what was really special was in the INFP Soul Bootcamp that we ran last fall. So that was the only one we ran live. I think there's 3 different people who wanted to start YouTube channels around like their creative work. So we had like a poet and a singer and an artist. And they were just all kind of like giving each other access to each other's creative work and like encouraging each other. And I was like, wow, I don't know if without each other's encouragement that ever would have come to fruition. And by the end, everyone was like posting links to their channels. And I think that's really beautiful, because when you come in with something, and I always encourage people to come in with something that you want to specifically see if you can bring into fruition in the world, and drag it through the 6 weeks and figure out, if I apply every single principle that I'm learning here to this one thing I really want to see happen, how much easier does it get? And we were really able to see how much easier it got for people and how like free and light they felt sharing themselves afterwards. And that's really, really special, because I think for me, like, I'm sure this is true for many, many types. It just shows up in different flavors. But a thing that holds me back a lot of the time is having this like self-judgment about my process. So if I'm working on something, or I'm creating something, or I'm starting a new venture, you know, like you said, you're comparing yourself to like your peers who are driving a completely different vehicle down the road. And you're like, okay, why isn't my vehicle going fast enough? And I've had to learn as an NFP, like my vehicle goes really slow for a long time, because it needs to like look at all the scenery and kind of figure out what the layout is. And then it just zooms once it gets on the highway, and it can catch up times 10 to all the vehicles that have been kind of steadily going the whole time. Now we're off on our metaphor train as per usual. But I think that's something like NFPs don't trust in themselves enough. So we wear ourselves out, like trying to work steadily and consistently towards things, when what we should be doing is giving ourselves time and space to really, really understand what we're trying to convey, and then take off running and let ourselves work for a week straight and see what comes out. And a lot of the time we can get further than other people if we do that. But because we don't trust that process, we never get there, and we don't engage with it in the first place, because it feels kind of scary and unknown. And I think the more perceivers in particular, but NFPs specifically, because there's a lot that comes up there, like emotionally, that we have to handle. But the more FPs we can get trusting that process, the more incredible work we're going to start seeing in the world, because FPs are so talented, just like crazy, crazy capable. It's just a totally different process than you see for any other type.
Yeah, all of what you just said, that it just excites me as a coach, because this is literally why I'm so excited about typology all the time, because it helps people, again, not only know themselves, but then also know what method best works for them. And a lot of people, it's so easy for them to assume like, oh, I'm a failure, or because they're comparing themselves too much to other people, especially other people of different types. And so you just saying the simple thing, and a lot of times the answer is just that simple. We have to accept who we are. We have to accept the processes that we were given, you know, that we are able to work with. And then let's work with what we have, and we can still achieve whatever that we want to probably achieve. But we just have to do it in a different way that's not going to be like how that other person might want to do. And you especially talking about like FPs and how they have that interesting way of being able to achieve whatever they want to. But they may not like trust that process as much. They may not like allow themselves to get there. Like, as you know, and most of the people or everyone on my channel knows, like I'm married to an ISFP, and even though she's not like an NFP per se, so like there's a little bit of a difference there, I can definitely see a lot of that of what you're talking about, because for her, yeah, I just definitely see like, oh wow, you are definitely a perceiver, I'm definitely a judger, and on top of that, you're definitely using FI. Like there's a kind of, I've always viewed FI and TE as like gas in the vehicle. And so for me, I've always thought like, okay, for an FI user, the more that they like are absolutely in love with something, and the more that they, like obsess over it and they get so passionate about it and everything, that TE is going to find a way to like kick it into gear. Like it's going to be the vehicle that's going to be able to get them there. But the FI has to be the gasoline. And this could be for TJs or for FPs. But I think that especially like for FPs, like you have to really fall in love with that and be able to, like, once you're in love with it enough, then you're going to find your way to somehow like get there. So as a coach, the way that I've been like kind of like coaching people is like, when it comes to like the ISFPs, it's like, okay, you have all of that fuel, but the TE is like, inferior. So it's like, you don't really know how to get there. Instead of trying to figure out like how to get there, how about you just jump into action? SE, just start, doing something, just do something. Eventually you're probably going to find an ENTJ or something that's going to do all the work for you because they like fuel. And then it's like, okay, cool. And then for the ESFPs, well, I guess, and then for INFPs, it's kind of like the same thing, like do something, but for them, it's a little bit different because it's NE, and you might speak a little bit on that one. But then for ESFPs, it's a little bit of the reverse where it's like, okay, they are doing like a lot, but then that's probably the problem. Like, okay, let's find what you're actually in love with. Like what just makes your heart like set on fire. And then since you're already good at doing a lot, once you find that, then you'll be able to, have that long-term focus because your inferior NI might, now kick into space in that sense. But you have to find what you're actually like in it for the long run. And then for ENFPs, I'm assuming also like a similar thing where it's like, okay, they're always like, okay, how about this or how about that? And theorizing all of these different realities or like things that they'd want to get into. But again, hone into that FI auxiliary. If I fall madly in love with this, then the inferior SI will also come in and play its own part. And so that's, in a nutshell, like how I often like see it when it comes to like FPs and that whole FITE polarity. But it's something that once you tap into that and you're able to actually like really understand it and you can trust your FI in that process, and then your TE just like kicks in. I don't know. I find that to be like so amazing because FPs, like, in my opinion, when it comes to art, like they run it. Like, not that other types, of course, obviously are incapable of like producing great art. That's far from the case. But FPs, in my opinion, like have produced like incredible art that, you can tell that there's so much passion and so much emotion into it and everything. And this is art in like many different styles, not just like music or painting, but like in just several different types of like crafts. And so what you're doing is like, I see it as like, I'm always talking about seeds, but you're literally like figuratively planting seeds in all of these minds and like watering them, or the seeds that are already planted there, you're helping water them and you're helping them to be able to trust this plant to grow and produce fruit that's now going to be put out into the world. So y'all need to get in on this, by the way, if you're an NFT.
No, that's exactly it. Like the number one thing I would hope is that, because what's helped me the most in life is just anytime I've taken a course that feels foundational. So it's like, oh, this allows me to approach everything else in a different way. And it allows me to kind of understand myself and work with myself in a way that makes everything else I'm learning a lot easier. And that's kind of how I see it. Like you said, like planting these seeds. And then what grows is this ability to live in a very different way. And it's also, as per usual, you've said like 10 things that are making my NE go nuts. But yeah, it's funny that you brought up specifically ISFPs. My partner is also an ISFP. And I think a lot of this course I can attribute to just watching her live her life in a way that, like, I've never seen an FP who trusts themselves that much and who is just so willing to go, okay, this is my process and I'm just going to run with it. So when I met her, I remember just being like, this person just goes on vacation for a week, then stays up all night every night for the next week. And then like her process was just the most perceiver process, but she runs this incredibly successful company, like works with some of like some incredibly like well-known people, and everyone's always happy with it. And but she does it in a completely unconventional way. And it's like, if you looked at every piece of motivation advice and like every kind of like morning routine, like power of habits kind of advice, like she does none of it. But she has such a successful career and is so happy with the way she lives her life. And I'm like, man, this is really cool. Because as you mentioned, like me being an auxiliary FI user, so ENFPs and ESFPs use FI in the second position. I don't always trust my FI process. Like I think that I have to go to my TE and do it like the organized way. And just meeting someone who so deeply trusts their FI and runs with it was such a cool thing to see. And that got me thinking about like, oh, where have I not been doing that? And I think something that when you were talking about the car analogy and like the car and the gas, I think something that I've noticed, especially since working with so many NFPs, is that a part of the process we don't usually trust is the times when we need to like park the car and sit in a parking lot for a while because we are out of gas. Because I think that feeling of being lost, of not knowing where we're going, is so core to the NFP experience. Like a lot of us have hit points in our lives where we're like, wow, I'm just kind of driving aimlessly. And there's all these places people are telling me I should go, but I don't really feel called. And you said like, you know, when the passion is there, the car can just go, right? But sometimes the passion isn't there. And that's also a part of the process, is learning to like slow down and be like, okay, I have to wait maybe a couple months, maybe a couple years until that feeling really comes back for me. And it's okay in the meantime to take a break, to just drive around the block a few times, to go somewhere that's completely aimless and just look at the trees, like whatever you can do to kind of rest and digest your experiences, especially for EFPs who have that drive, as you said, to like constantly do. We need time to like take a load off and just assimilate what we've learned before our FI kind of comes back screaming and is like, okay, I know where I want to go now. And I think that that's something that a lot of us have a lot of trouble trusting that process. Like FI will kind of go, okay, I was once really passionate. Now I'm not really passionate. So it's all over forever. Like I'll never have another creative surge. And that's so untrue. The only time that ever happens is if you're just trying to beat a dead horse creatively for years and you're not letting yourself replenish that creative energy. So even understanding that like not working is a part of your process, not being creative for a period of time is part of your process, just letting yourself stay open and engaged with the world and being in a state of kind of wonder and awe for an FP is always going to be a really important part of what makes them productive or successful or creative later on. And that's, I think, the biggest self-trust piece that I see come up again and again and again for NFPs who think that like to be fulfilling my destiny, I should always be on and creative and moving. And it's like, no, it doesn't work like that. It would feel great if it did, but it just doesn't. And that's cool too.
Wow, that was a gem actually, because I'm that just blew up so many things in my head too. Because now I'm thinking of like I believe that Lauryn Hill, for example, is an INFP, and she actually talks about that the same way. Like she made an album, and then she had to like go and like live life and just relax. And I feel like a lot of higher TE users, for example, like they're probably listening. They're like, what? I don't have time to just relax. I have to put this out by like next week or whatever. But the way that you just explained everything, it's like, it's really showing that, you know, reverse. And of course, both types can like learn from each other, you know, that, you know, of course, FPs, sure, like there has to be a time where like you put out, but they're just like what you said, like being able to embrace that parked car experience. That was such a really good play on that analogy. Like that, I hadn't even really like honed in on that type of thinking before. Like, wow, just really sitting there and allowing yourself to just live life. Like that in itself can be a muse, and in some way, you know, you'll be able to find that gas once again, because you may not even be looking for it, because now you're just allowing yourself to be open to whatever life may present to you. Man, that was beautiful, Heidi.
Yeah, I mean, well, thank you. And that I think can be particularly prevalent for NFPs because we have introverted sensing, right? Mm-hmm. In INFPs, it's their third. In ENFPs, it's our fourth function. And introverted sensing can get really stuck on things. Mm-hmm. So it can get really stuck on like, okay, this one thing made me really happy at one point, or this one group of friends made me really happy at one point, or whatever it is. And then we just think we have to hold on to, we have to die clutching that thing or we'll never be happy again. Mm-hmm. And that can come at the expense of us engaging our extroverted intuition, especially at times like, you know, the past year we've been in a pandemic. There hasn't been a lot of opportunity to go out into the world and meet new people and engage with new perspectives in like a very open and dynamic way. And when we're not doing that, we just get really anchored in these specific sensory experiences and think like, this is it. I got to drive back to that one mountaintop. That's the only mountaintop. I'll never find another one. And it's like, it's only when we're engaging with that NE, or for the SFP, that SE, that we realize like there's so many other places we can go, so many, but we have to, sometimes you're going to have to drive halfway up like 10 different mountains before you find the one where like the view is the right view for you. And it's like letting yourself do that and letting yourself engage with that process, even if it's years and years before you're seeing any sort of tangible result from it, will eventually become like this story you tell about how you reach the place that you are. There's this book that I'm reading right now. Maybe I'm just going a little off topic, but there's a book I'm reading that I've been reading it for 4 months because I can't finish it because I love it so much. So I have like a chapter left, keep going back and reading one page, and I'm like, okay, I'm not going to finish it.
I know that.
Right? Books are like friends for ends. Like it's like, oh, this is my friend. I'm engaging with them through the art of reading their words. So my friend Ross Ellenhorn, not my real friend, don't know his life, but he wrote this book called How We Changed. I think he might be an INTJ. Like I kind of get that out of his writing style. But he was talking about how he's like, oh, we always look at like the summit of the mountain and we think like this is the only part that matters. But he's like, every step you take when you're changing in any direction, even if it feels like a step backwards or whatever, he's like, you have to look at that as vital terrain. Like that is such important ground to cross, because that becomes the eventual change. That like a million steps in a certain direction, even missteps and misdirected routes, end up becoming the thing that brought you to where you are. And if you don't value every step along the way, you're going to get really quickly discouraged when you're not at the mountaintop. And I love that so much. There's some things that just like speak to my FI. And I loved that sentence, like trust that this is vital terrain, so much that I've like thought about getting it tattooed on me. Because I think it is really... Right? It's like, yeah, it's such an easy thing for any type to forget when you're not where you want to be, that like the process of being lost and finding your way and trying out different things and realizing what doesn't work, like all of that is not only important and relevant, but vital. Like you cannot get to the end point if you're not appreciating every single step along the way. And I think that also is something that when we're in exploration mode as any type, so when we're in our NE as INFPs or ENFPs, when we're in SE as SFPs, when you're in your NI as an ENFJ, like it's like that process of letting your worldview form before you hand it off to like your decision-making functions to do something with it is a very, very important process. Like it's 90% of the work. The putting it down on a page or speaking it or whatever, that's like 10% of it at most, but 90% is letting that worldview form in a meaningful way.
Wow. Yeah, that really clicks, because I feel like that relieves so much pressure from people. A lot of people, everything that what you're saying to me is just all about relieving pressure from these types, especially FP types, you know, who have, again, the lower TE. It's not that they can't do the TE, but let's rely more on those stronger strengths, you know, that FI, that SE. And there's a lot that can be used from there. And then that can also, when you use those properly, then you can build more from the TE that's lower, and you don't have to like strain it as much. And so all of what you're saying right there, like just being fueled off of like inspiration. And even recently, Personality Hacker had did a podcast on using hype to fuel you. And that's kind of like what I'm like thinking about, because I believe that the guy who was in the podcast was also an ENFP. And it's like, oh, that makes a lot of sense, because just using that like FI and then the NE is like, what's your muse? Like, you know, and you have to be able to accept that process. And if you are so bent on trying to meet this deadline or trying to put out, and you're not really then allowing yourself to be able to have that flow of creativity, to get into your flow state, to get into your inspiration. And again, that can go for like any type, but I feel like that's especially necessary for FPs to hear. So I think that, yeah, I'm just listening and I'm just thinking so much about how there's an FP out there who will be watching this video, who'll be listening to this podcast, and they are probably in tears. Like that's what I'm envisioning, because it's like I've coached so many who I can see this stress and this pressure they have all the time, and how much that just being able to hear this kind of like validation, this permission that, hey, it's okay for you to be in parked car season right now. And that's not a waste of time. That's actually beneficial for you. That's, I don't know, like that's beautiful. Even for an INTJ that I was one time coaching, um, I was able to talk to her for some time, and she had a lot of things. Like, I pretty much told her that we're going to take some time to really dig into your FI, and just kind of like get a lot of like stuff out of there. And then she was like, oh, that sounds so draining and just kind of like a waste of time or something like that. And I was like, you're right about the draining part. And the thing is, we have to drain a lot of what was clogged up in that FI so that you can now become productive in your TE. And that was like mind blowing for her, because she was also just like, and she's, even as a judger, she was focused on like, I have to do this and I have to do that. I have to do this. And it's like, yeah, but especially having FI as a tertiary function, you're underestimating how much that is influencing you right now. And if your FI is not healthy, if it's clogged up with all this stuff, then the quality of whatever that you're putting out is not going to be good. And so we have to really hone in on that FI. And it's not a waste of time to be, again, in that parked car mode and just allow yourself to like, clear stuff out, get everything like cleaned, so that now when you do get back into driving, whatever you're putting out there into the world, your TE is putting out quality stuff because your FI is healthy. You're using good fuel. And so especially when it comes to an FP type, that's even on a whole other level, because all you're using is fuel. Like, that was from an FI tertiary. So you can only imagine like FI auxiliary and FI dominant. If you don't have those things like really down packed, then that TE is really going to like also screw you over. So you have to find a way to be able to get them to work together in tandem and find that rhythm, and accept, once again, this is what Heidi's saying, that parked car mode, like that's what I'm just taking away. Like, it's okay to be a parked car for this season. Yeah.
And it's like, I love what you said. I love what you said about putting that high quality fuel in. And like, if there's a backlog in your FI, it's not going to run properly. And that's such, again, it's like those basic pieces of advice that are so powerful when we really act on them. Because I think most FI users have spent most of their life, depending on how they were raised or whatever, but being told like, okay, you're too emotional, you're too sensitive, you have to put your feelings aside and do your work. And if we do that, we're going to produce such bad work. Like, we're robbing the world of the work we could be doing, because we have to go through those backlogs. We have to understand that like your FI is communicating important information. All of your cognitive functions are always communicating really important information to you. And if you're not listening to them and you're trying to ignore them and bypass them, you're really not setting yourself up for any sort of success at all. But I think it's very easy for FI users to kind of like gaslight themselves and be like, oh, this isn't important. My feelings don't matter. I can just put it aside. And then what you find is you have a lot of ENFPs and INFPs who sit down to get to work, and they're so emotionally clogged up that it's like they can't focus. They try to go to sleep and they're so emotionally clogged up. Their mind is running in a bunch of different directions trying to avoid their emotions. Like, you have all of these kind of challenges and problems and things we reach for to try to get rid of our emotions that are unhealthy. And it's like, all we really need to do in those cases is fully accept and see our emotions as reasonable messengers. So instead of being like, oh, I'm being too emotional or I'm overreacting. Okay, well, even if that's true, have your reaction. Maybe don't react outwardly if you feel like you're not being reasonable interpersonally, but like sit down with yourself. And whether it's like journaling out what you need to journal out, whether it's like, I like to engage with a lot of courses and modalities. So I'll be like, okay, what might this be related to? Because my NE really likes to have different modalities to like run my FI through. And I'll be like, okay, is this an attachment style thing? Or is it a personality style thing? Or is it, and understanding my FI from 100 different angles is very, very helpful for me in processing it. So whatever it is for you, like giving yourself the time and space to do that is going to make the rest of your life infinitely easier. So wow. Even if that's as simple as just being like, okay, before I sit down to work, I'm going to take 5 minutes and maybe write down all the things I'm kind of distracted by or all the things I want to be thinking about, and then promise myself that as soon as I'm done 1 hour of work, I'll give myself 15 minutes to think about all these things and kind of go through them in my head, and just letting your mind know, like, I'm not ignoring this, I'm going to get to it, and and actually doing it, so that you start to build accountability with yourself and trust yourself, is going to go a really, really long way in allowing yourself to think clearly, to fall asleep, to meditate, to just have moments of calm and silence with yourself, because your FI isn't screaming at you the whole time. And that's what I think I see all the time with FI users. It's just screaming at them because they're it's like trying to quiet a baby who's hungry. It's like, it's not gonna stop screaming until you give it food. And it's the same with your cognitive functions.
Yeah, that's exactly it. Wow, that was perfect. And so, like I said, everyone, y'all really need to clearly sign up for this NFP Soul Bootcamp. And we're going to give you some more details about that toward the end. But just to switch gears for a bit, Heidi, what type of misconceptions would you say that we really need to address in this video for ENFPs?
Oh man, there's so many. I think the thing that kind of keeps me engaged in the type world is just how many. I'll try to leave for a while, and then I'll come back to Twitter and people will be saying things about NFPs, and I'm like, stop it. I have to develop 12 new products now because no one understands. But I think one that's been bothering me lately that I've seen a lot online is, I think that NFPs in general, NPs in general, but specifically ENFPs tend to be kind of the scapegoat for it, is this idea that NE is just very kind of like random and kooky and funny and all over the place. And I think that there's a very, very deep intellect that gets missed with NE. And it gets missed in all the NE types, but I think it's kind of like, you always hear the stereotypes being applied to ENFPs of like, oh, they're just kind of like kooky and crazy and funny, but it's like, that's it. And I don't think that's true of any type. I don't think there's a that's it to any type. But I think that why a lot of NE users specifically feel very misunderstood is because the way our minds work is we have this cross-contextual thinking pattern. So it's like when we look at one thing, we're immediately, unconsciously, without even trying to do this, cross-referencing it with like everything else we know that's kind of in that category and things in a different category. And that's why we often come up with these very eloquent metaphors, because we see how this is like this is like this is like this, and how we're able to like bring together different modalities and different trains of thought and merge them, which is something NI is also wonderful at. And that gets missed a lot. And the reason it gets missed is because this all happens so quickly for us internally that we can look at one thing and on it, and right away we're talking about something else. And other people can see that as like, oh, you're being funny and quirky. But to us, there is a very real thought process that's going on there. And it is often very complex, very nuanced, very deep. And it's not seen as such. And we can laugh that off to an extent, and we can kind of even revel in the like, oh, I'm just so funny and random. But I think that over a long period of time, a lot of NFPs end up feeling very misunderstood, very not seen, very underappreciated, because they have these very active minds that other people see as just kind of like kooky and random. And I tweeted something like a week ago or so that was like, oh, NE always has a 5-hour explanation for whatever they're thinking. If you think it's random, it's just because you didn't ask how they got there. But if you ask, they're happy to walk you through that. And I noticed that like a lot of the NP types really resonated with that in particular. So I think it's not specific, to ENFPs, but I see that one come up a lot. And I find that frustrating because I also see ENFPs kind of giving up and going along with it, which like I've done in the past, and just being like, yeah, I'm so random. But it's like, no, take your thought processes seriously as an ENFP, because they're very, very prevalent and real and profound. And I think that kind of, it almost creates this like gaslighty effect accidentally. I don't think anyone's intending to make us question our reality, but when people are always telling you one thing that isn't really true about you, you start to believe it yourself. And it's like, I see this with NFPs who come in and they're like, oh, my thinking doesn't make any sense. And I'm like, no, it does make sense. You just have to trust yourself to believe that it does, and to follow those trains of thought, and to push back when other people tell you it doesn't, because it makes sense to you. And it's not really doing you any favors to not honor that processing in yourself, because no one else is going to do it for you.
Wow. Yeah. And that's actually a really big thing that even for me, like I often do actually associate NE as random. And because I always tether NE with SI, then I of course know, like, just like what you said, that's not where it is. But I can totally see how, like, just saying that, people who may not always see NE attached to SI, then in their heads, they're going to assume like, oh yeah, NE really is just random, period. And like, that's just what it is. Even if I'm maybe saying it, but I know better. It's like, well, no, it just looks random on the outside because we don't know where that thought is associating with. Like I'm in a group chat on Telegram with some of my subscribers, as well as some people from Twitter. And there are two NE DOMs in there, an ENFP and an ENTP. And whenever they, like when the ENFP is the one who sparks most of the conversations, like she will just throw something like, in my opinion, randomly into the chat. Like she'll be like, hey, guys, what do you think about, this idea just recently was like, oh, this idea of like how the whole notion of men shouldn't say like, well, not all men. And she like gave like this like 9-point like post that she had seen and everything. And of course, like from there, the conversation just spirals into like so many other things about like, but you can see that it's like connecting so many different things. And the ENTP is like right there with her.
Yeah.
And I have tried, as well as an INTJ in the group and everything, I tried to like keep up, but I don't know if it's like I just can't type that fast or like what, like they just like it's so rapid how fast that they can go with these things intellectually. And then it's not until like they slow down or they kind of like stop that I like kind of come out and then I say like this big paragraph of all of the stuff that they just said. And again, to me, it's like because they can rapidly like go somewhere. It's like NESI. It can seem random and then also paradoxically very specific because it'll be like, oh yeah, what if, and then it'll say the hypothetical, but then it will get so specific about that hypothetical scenario that it's like, wow, that's so random. But then because it's so specific, like, have you experienced this before? Like, or like, how did you just all of a sudden like come up with that? Like my mind personally does not work like that. But yeah, so it's really interesting again to hear like from an NE dom like herself, like, yeah, we may come off as random on the outside, but everything's always but cross contextualized. And even if, in my opinion, and you can definitely correct me if I'm wrong, but in my opinion, maybe another reason why I've always assumed a lot of times that, oh, NE is like random is because for me, I'm always able to retrace my thought process, which I personally associate with NI. So even if I seem like I'm going on a tangent, then it's kind of like, oh, how did I get to thought G? Oh, that's because H. And then, and I just kind of like think backwards and it's like, oh yeah, this is how these two ideas connect. So it wasn't really random. Like it's because we started talking about this and boom, boom, boom. But then with NE, because it's not only like, for me, it doesn't even go that quickly. So I can trace it back. But for NE, it seems like it leaps to H rather than A, B, C, D. And this is just me as an NI user from the outside. So then it's just like, how did you even get there? And then when you ask me, times you said like they can give you a 5-hour explanation. I believe that you can, and I believe that there are NE users that are out there that can, but does it take work for NE, I guess, to be able to, because I think that a lot of the NE users that I know, they'd be like, actually, I don't really know how I got here. But that's not to say that it was totally random. Something obviously struck that thought, but they may just not have been aware of it. Does that make sense?
So, yeah, it's like I have two answers to that. One is just kind of like as a visual, you can imagine kind of like a neural network where it's like, okay, imagine a brain where there's all these different sensory impressions that we've stored using our SI. And it's like for, let's say, someone who uses SI as a dominant function, everything that comes into their brain kind of goes into one of those sensory impressions in a very organized way. So it's like, okay, we'll put this in the category of, I pick up a mug, category of things that we drink, category of, or things we put drinks in, whatever. It's well organized, and then NE eventually kind of comes and makes the connections between these things. But for the brain of an NE user, it's like all of these sensory impressions are in there, and then NE is kind of like this lightning rod that like lights them all up at once and connects them all. So it's like it does. I do get when people are like, oh, I don't know how you saw that as connected to that, because our minds do connect things in a way that I think other minds don't do in the same way.
For sure.
Like it's not as linear. So it's not random, but it's not linear, and those are different things. But I think to the overall point you were making, this actually really reminds me of a conversation I was having with my INFP best friend about FE. And we were talking about how as FI users, we're like, oh, something we hear FE users say a lot is, or the FE users we know at least is, oh, I don't know if I can trust this person. Like, can I trust this friend? Can I trust this acquaintance? Can I trust whatever? And we were both kind of like, yeah, that's never something we really think. Like, I don't often feel like I need to put a lot of trust in people in the first place. Like, and it's like part of that could be my Enneagram type, but it's like, but it's really truly, I think, an FI thing where it's like, well, because I don't disclose that much about myself, like I don't need to trust people as much because not many people have this like super personal information about me that's really sensitive or whatever. But then we kind of looked at each other and we're like, oh, I guess because FE processes verbally all the thoughts that we have in our minds and all the emotions that we have, they're saying out loud. We're only saying like the end result of this kind of perfectly polished emotion that we've arrived at, where we understand it clearly and it's not offensive to everyone. But FE has to say everything along the way to get there. And then we took a moment and we were like, oh, what if we said everything we felt out loud? And we were both like horrified. Like we were like, oh my God, I would trust nobody. Like you would have to be so careful about who you were talking to. And I think it's kind of like, it's similar when you look at NE versus NI, because NI can be like, oh, your brains are moving so fast, like you're throwing out all these points so quickly. But it's like, no, your brain is moving just as quickly as an NI user. You're just not saying it all. So we're saying our entire process, the way that you're sitting back thinking about it, and then coming out with your kind of polished jewel, which is often why NI is so eloquent and well-spoken, because they've really thought through what they're going to say. But NE is just, all the processing you do internally, we do externally.
That makes 100% sense. That makes 100% sense because, yeah. And it's like, I guess I've heard of NE being likened to like throwing stuff at the wall, just like till like it sticks and everything. Whereas like for NI, in my opinion, it's like, no, I'm not just going to keep on tossing. Like I have to wait and I have to like really, and I might miss the first time, but then I'll like, I'm going to really try to like savor as many as I can. But you've already threw as many, like I'm looking at the NE user next to me who's just like throwing a lot. When I was in, and I think that also another thing that I learned from at least profiler training was that NE users love brainstorming while NI users often disdain it. And so that was like just one thing that they taught us, like when we were learning how to like profile people professionally. They were like, if you are confused about like if you're dealing with an INFP or an INFJ or even an INFP or an ISFP, ask them, how much does brainstorming like excite you? Like, is it like energy, like does it excite, like get you like really excited, or does this like kind of like drain you? And I've tried this a lot of different times with people that I already knew were like what their type was, just so that I can be like, okay, because you don't want to just take what you were taught. Like I want to see like, okay, let me see like how accurate this is like across the board. And personally, from my experience, I've seen that to be true. Like I remember asking an ESFP, a friend of mine who knows little about type, so she had no idea what I was asking her that. I was like, hey, how do you feel about brainstorming? And she was like, and I was like, oh. And she was like, I mean, like it's kind of okay, like, but you could tell like she was really like, and she said like even thinking about it is kind of like draining. I was like, wow, that's interesting, because boom, boom, boom. And I explained like why, that was. But I feel like that again, like shows like what you were talking about, because when I am around people who are just brainstorming, like NE users, again, in my opinion, they're so quick. It's like, oh, how about this? How about that? And they're like throwing lots of ideas out there. And then it's almost like, dang, not only can I not throw the ideas out there as fast as they are, but I'm trying to find an actual idea that'll stick. And y'all are just like, y'all throw this idea. Again, this is how it looks like for me. It's like you throw this idea, but then you're like, oh no, that probably doesn't work. How about this? No. And so now I'm also thinking about, like how you said FE versus FI. Like, yeah, the FI users like looking at the FEs, like, why are you saying all of this? Why are you just putting out all of these feelings? It's like, oh, but actually maybe that's not really how I feel. Whereas like the FI users like cultivating it, like how I just described the NI user to be. Yeah, all of that to say, like, that really makes a lot of sense now. Like, I'm connecting that with how, again, NE can appear random on the outside, but there is a method to the madness.
Yeah, I would say the only caveat I would make is like, I think that ironically, especially if they've been in the type community for a while, so many users, myself included, can almost have an aversion to the word brainstorming because we associate it with kind of like a stuffy corporate brainstorming session where it's
Uh,
like, oh, people are sitting us down and treating our any like, you know, like they're trying to milk a cow. And it's like, okay, give me your ideas. And we're like, we can't like, if anything, I actually think in those specific situations, SC users can be a lot better at brainstorming because they're very good at being like, okay, in this specific context, these 4 things might work. Let's go try them immediately. Whereas NE needs to kind of like synthesize and think about things and connect them with their SI before like we have our brain babies. Like, you know, we'll just wake up some mornings or be sitting there eating lunch and all of a sudden it's like, oh, this is connected to this. And then it's all over the place. But I do think it's definitely true that any users will organically brainstorm all the time. And when I say we might have an aversion to the word, that doesn't mean we have an aversion to the actual process of brainstorming.
right.
But I think like personally, I have memories of like being in brainstorming sessions with like corporations where I'm like, oh, I know only 3 things are going to fit this mold and it feels too constraining, so I don't like it. But definitely like in conversation all of the time, I will brainstorm and I feel so like alive and engaged when I'm thinking about different how something could go. And I'll go off on like a, 2-hour monologue and just go on about like, oh, and this could lead to this, could lead to this. And that just feels so exciting and so like revitalizing. And it's way more exciting than actually doing the thing, which, as you pointed out, is kind of the difference between SE and NE. Like the best part to me is when I'm thinking about what could happen. But the best part to the SE user is actually doing it. So it's like they come up with the idea and they're like, cool, let's get to work. NE comes up with the idea and they're like, okay, the funnest thing is to think of the 12 other ideas that could come from that. So it's like a slightly different like end goal. And by slightly different, I mean completely different.
Yeah. Wow. That's really interesting. Yeah. Okay. So, and I know that you said that you had plenty. So this isn't me milking the cow, but do you have another one right off the top of the head that you'd want to address?
I mean, with ENFPs, there's a lot. And I think the kind of common ones are just this like flaky, irresponsible person that I think doesn't resonate for a lot of ENFPs because we do take our FI very seriously. And it's like, if we're committed to people or we're committed to a certain mission, we will not flake. Like we will show up. We might do it in an unconventional way. We might approach things slightly differently than a J would. But we're not these kind of free-spirited, open-minded to the point of our brains falling out kind of people. Like we are very intentional with our relationships, with the promises that we make. And I think that the genuineness and the authenticity of that FI gets lost a lot in type descriptions. Like because we're so extroverted, because we're so bubbly. And I even wonder if you could relate to this as an ENFJ. It's like our depth gets missed.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
All the time.
Yeah, because it's like when you're very warm and out there and you want to make other people feel comfortable and you want to make sure that like when you're in a room, everyone's having a good time and everyone's getting along, and it bothers you if that's not happening, which people think like, oh, FI doesn't really care about its environment or whatever. It's like, I don't know, man, I walk into a room and if like I see someone having a bad time, I can't have a good time, but I feel bad about it. Like it's very present for us as well. So I think that people very easily miss because they just see us as these kind of like fun, warm, engaging people that we're processing things very, very deeply. And our NE is also a very deep processor, even though it doesn't always seem like that. It kind of seems weird and random, especially when we link it in with that FI. We're creating this very intricate worldview that gets missed all of the time, which is maybe similar to my first point. But I think that that's probably the single biggest challenge for NFPs when forming relationships is that a lot of the time, I think we have this experience of people seeing what they want to see in us, which is this kind of like warm, outgoing, bubbly person, and missing the depth and missing also what we take seriously, because NFPs are pretty damn serious people. Like we're not just kind of fun and bubbly. Like there's really, really a lot of, like in the boot camp, a very common topic that came up all the time, existential angst, existential dread, existential loneliness, just feeling very deeply alone on like a core mental and emotional level is something that comes up all the time for NFPs,
Yeah.
and that isn't really ever talked about as part of our experience, but it's very, very much there. In part because we feel so misunderstood a lot of the time, because our cognitive functions aren't like the most popular. The world isn't really set up for them. So we don't always find our place and our people. But I think that that's an experience that gets missed a lot of the time for our type. And that's also why I think I see a lot of people not identifying with the NFP type, because they're like, oh, it's just this like kind of fun, bubbly person. And it's like, no, it's a lot more than that. But that being said, the same is true for, I feel like the SFP descriptions are the same, if not worse. Like they're like, oh, it's like, and it's like, yeah, it's almost like, okay, the descriptions are like SFPs are fun and bubbly, NFPs are fun and bubbly, but then they have some thoughts. So then it's like, you get the SFPs who are fun and bubbly and have lots of thoughts. And they're like, okay, I'm an NFP. And the NFPs are like, oh, well, I must be an NTJ. Like it's just it's a mess, because we're not taking anyone seriously enough. We're only talking about what we see on the surface. And I think that happens for a lot of types. I think ENFJ might honestly be one that it happens for almost as often, if not absolutely as often, if not more.
Yeah, I know, at least, for me as an ENFJ, one of the biggest things that I see all the time. And in fact, like even with, unfortunately, ENFJs that I've seen, now picking up the title INFJ on themselves. It's like, oh man. And I get why they do it, because they're like, well, I'm seeing these misconceptions and these, stereotypes about us, and I don't really relate to that. Or, people be like, oh, well, yeah, they've told me, it's like, well, you can't be an ENFJ because, you're thoughtful in this way, or boom, 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 or you are actually like quiet in these kind of like contexts and stuff. And it's like, really? But then, there are people who, like, I literally was in class with an ENFJ, and he said, yeah, I'm pretty sure I'm an ENFJ, but everyone keeps on telling me that I'm an INFJ, because of the insight that I present here. And like, they think that I'm just really like introverted and stuff. And then I think about like, Professor Xavier from X-Men, and how like, well, and that one is interesting because, the cartoon version, yes, that one is an INFJ. But then when you look at the movies, like where, I can't remember, Neil Patrick, I can't remember his name at the moment, but he plays the younger version of Professor Xavier. It's like, you can clearly see that he is an ENFJ. It's Jean Grey who's the INFJ in that. But from comparing that, like, a lot of people, like, they've said like, oh no, he's actually an INFJ because look at how focused, and his TI is so this, and, boom, boom, boom. And I'm like, I don't know. So I can talk about, ENFJ stuff like all the time, but I think in actuality, a lot of times it comes down to that just whole like extroversion versus introversion kind of thing. Like, they make it seem kind of like with the NE thing, they make it seem like extroverts, because we are giving more than what introverts are, then what we're giving is not quality. And so then it makes it seem as if like the introverts, whatever they have to give is a lot more quality because it's limited on resource. And I feel like in actuality, it's like, well, just because you are able to give less does not mean that my quality is less, because I can produce more than you can. And of course, you can't really like fathom that because you're an introvert. And it's not to say, again, that I'm better than you, but there's a lot of like misunderstanding here. It's like, it looks like I'm giving more than you are, because that is true. But also remember that I'm also producing more than you are. And so just by nature as an extrovert, then I do produce more energy than you might as an introvert. And so then I do have more to give. Does that mean that, I never spread myself too thin? Absolutely not. Like, I'm definitely more prone to spread myself too thin than an introvert would be. But when I'm actually honing it in, as I have been over the past years and everything, then I still have all of that production that I've been making, and my friend group might still be bigger than yours. But you have to remember, once again, that I'm producing also, once again, more than you are. So then I can potentially feed more than you might. And that does not say anything about how your quality is better or my quality is better. Probably the same quality, just more production, more ability to like handle it in this way. And I feel like that's something that you know, a lot of introverts and extroverts just continue to like get mixed up. So especially when it comes to like ENFPs, and a big I don't know if it's a misconception that like that's what you're saying, but like, you know, a big thing like they're seen as is like being flighty, you know, and just like, oh, I'll be your best friend, like, you know, like one moment, and then all of a sudden like I bounce. And I actually have experienced that, like probably like 3 times since I was like, you know, like with an ENFP. And that to me is not to say that, oh, you know, I hate ENFPs, they're flighty and, you know, it is what it is kind of thing. Like, it's something that's like, oh, you know, I've seen this pattern, but it's not something that I would like ascribe to every ENFP. And potentially that was even like when I just started getting into type. And for 2 of them, actually, I didn't even know about type to begin with. And so it made me start like thinking like there has to be like reason behind it. And I feel like that's probably what you're going to address now. So that flightiness and that flakiness, like, yeah.
Yeah, that's actually an awesome thing to address, because I think that is a stereotype. To an extent, there's some truth behind it. Like, I can definitely think of times in my life where I've been very flighty, where I have formed a really deep relationship really quickly of whatever nature and then just failed. And I think that this is a learning process, not only for ENFPs, but for the people who know them as well, because I think that what happens with ENFPs, and this is something that I'm still in the process of learning and accepting, is there's this mold of like what a stereotypical either life or relationship or friendship looks like. And it's very linear and long-term. Like the world that we were, especially the world that I was raised in, I think it's changing a lot for younger generations, but it's like, okay, you pick your track and you stay in that track forever, whether that's like with your relationships or with your work or whatever. And NFPs just can't do that. We can, but we'll burn out and hate it. So it's like we need a lot of exposure to a lot of different experiences, a lot of different people. And it's of our nature to kind of get really obsessed with things really quickly and then get really obsessed with something else, kind of like move on from the last thing. And to the people that we were maybe really involved with for a while, that can feel horrible. Like, I could imagine how bad that would feel. And I think that a lot of ENFPs carry a lot of, and ESFPs, I think this is very related to as well, carry a lot of guilt about that. Like, we feel, okay, I know I was really heavily engaged with this for a while, but it's just starting to make me feel really overwhelmed. Like, I need something new to sink my teeth into. So I'll leave, go on to the next thing, and feel this overwhelming guilt about the fact that we've kind of put the last thing aside, maybe without too much explanation. And that guilt will keep us from re-engaging with those people and being honest with them and being like, you know what? I was feeling really drained in this environment. I loved the time we shared, like, you know, doing these things together or engaging in these conversations, but I'm going to be over here doing this thing for a while. Here's approximately how long I'll probably be over here engaged with this. And here's when we can check back in. And I think that when EFPs develop the mindfulness to do that, because I think it can feel very much like, oh, when we're in this new thing, we feel like it's going to be forever. And then we realize 6 months later, oh, this wasn't forever. It was for 6 months. And it's like the more we can start to trace those patterns through our lives and realize like, oh, I get really obsessed with things for like 6 months to 2 years at a time and then move on and have this constant turnover process, the more we can be critical about, okay, which relationships did I form in those times that really, really matter to me? And which ones do I really want to stay engaged with? And what's my conscious check-in point? So I have this, I feel like, a lot with like anytime I meet an INTJ, which is rare. But when I do, I feel like, oh, I have this instant brain connection with this person. But INTJs, because of that NI, are very, very consistent, I find, in their friendships. So it's like, oh, they have regular check-in points and stuff to a point. So I have to be very conscious about when I make a new INTJ friend, just telling them, literally just briefing them on myself and be like, I'm going to disappear for a while. I'll check in with you about, you know, at least like twice a year. And I would love for us to catch up then and continue this friendship. And I really want it to grow and I want us to be a part of each other's lives. But I'm not always going to be as focused and engaged as I am right now. And I find that if you can explain that to people, it goes over a lot better. But it's also the first step of doing that is accepting that you are that way, because a lot of us think it's wrong to be that way. Like, the only way to be is linear the whole way through for your entire life. And so we put so much pressure on ourselves to do that, that then when we don't do it, we just feel so much shame and guilt that we just kind of want to like shield our eyes and be like, no, I didn't do it. But if you can just accept that's how I am and it's okay, that can be a really beautiful thing. And I think like a great example of this is one of my best friends who's been one of my best friends since I was like 10. probably my oldest friend actually, who's still like close, is also an ENFP. And she does like wilderness therapy. So she'll be off in the bush for like 6 months at a time. And I just know, okay, I'm not going to hear from her during those 6 months, right? And then one day I'm going to be walking down the street and I'm going to get a call and it's going to be her. And she's going to be like, and you know, she'll have a new relationship and a new adventure and a new place she's going next. And maybe we'll meet up for a weekend somewhere in the world when it's like under normal circumstances, when the world is open, and we'll have like this deep, intense catch up. And then, you know, 2 years later, we'll do it again. And that's a very healthy relationship for both of us. Like we're both very supportive of each other, taking that time and doing our own thing and then coming back together when it works. And I think that if ENFPs were, and the reason it works is because we intuitively understand each other. So there's no guilt. Like I don't feel guilt when I disappear on her for a bit. She doesn't feel guilt when she disappears on me for a bit because we both get it. And I think that's the missing piece. If the ENFP can make it so that other people get it, the other people won't feel as like rejected and let down. But it takes that self-awareness and that willingness to stop judging yourself for the way that you process.
Wow. Yeah. I wish that I knew that when I dealt with these other ENFPs, because yeah, that would have like helped a lot, because I know that after the third one, that's when I started to get like, I wasn't necessarily bitter toward ENFPs at all, especially because I had met you and clearly like, you know, I still engaged with you after that time as well. But I definitely had this like, you know, thought process like, let me be careful with them, because it's already been like 3 different ones that I've now met. And it's like, oh my gosh, you know, like we're connecting. And I'm thinking like, wow, like the way that we're connecting over this past 2 weeks or whatever, like, wow, this is going to probably be like a very long-term friend. And they probably could have really been that way, but that energy was like just a really quick building, and then they like run off somewhere else. Like the energy just dramatically decreases. And I think for me, it's like, if I can at least, my whole thing is always about categorizing. Like, okay, this is, you know, like my romantic relationship with Jamila. Me and Jamila obviously have to speak every day, like, or at least every other day, you know, something, you know, like, because there's a lot more, you know, invested here, and it's just a different type of relationship. Okay, here are my intimates, you know, for them, it ranges, you know, like I have an INFP friend who we can go months without speaking. And then when we do like, you know, FaceTime or something, talk for hours. And I always refer to her specifically as one of my favorite people who have ever lived. It's because she's just absolutely amazing. Albany, she was on my INFJ versus INFP video. But yeah, like I really absolutely adore her. But then, you know, she's like, but then, you know, I can compare her to my INFJ friend, David, and me and him, we talk probably on like a weekly basis, you know, and then, you know, I have an INTJ friend, Andrea, stuff like that. Like, it's like, okay, categorizing in this sense. And then just being able, I guess, I don't know if it's a social dom thing or FE dom thing or what it might be, but like I'm categorizing where or like what type of friend that might be. And I guess when I would have met ENFPs in the past, they kept such great energy and consistency for like at least 2 weeks in that time,
Yeah.
then immediately I'm categorizing it as like, okay, this is somebody who is actually trying to like talk every day or at least every other day. And
Oh, you see that like the long term. Oh, that helps me understand my
yeah,
FE friend. Thank you for that.
yeah. And so then it's like, okay, this is kind of what we've established here. And so now, even if it starts to like decline a little bit, to me, that's natural. You know, it's like, okay, well, you know, it's kind of, we're getting busy or whatever. But when it seems like ghosted for like just however long, and
Right.
then they reappear randomly, or, you know, sometimes like it just seems like they didn't reappear, like I'm reaching out, they're not responding. And it's just like, did I do something? Like, did you hear something? Or like, am I boring? Did I bore you? But it seemed like we were so fine literally yesterday, literally 2 days ago. Like, how did it go from literally like 100% to 40, 30%, 0%? Like, I don't know, that dramatic decline makes me then feel like, okay, what's going on? And then I can see like, from those relationships, it's like, oh, there wasn't any bitter energy. But now it's kind of like it fosters something in me, because then it's like, well, I was kind of attaching to you and I thought that you were doing the same back, but you kind of like didn't. And on top of that, I'm seeing you put energy over here now in the exact same way. Is this just something that you just do? Like you just, I haven't really ever said that to any of them, but it's like, I'm thinking this, like, do you just like go and like make best friends with people and get them excited, and then all of a sudden like run off to another place to like, and the metaphor that I just had in my mind was probably like not like the best, but then again, like is, yeah, so I mean, it's just to be like candid concepts, like, it's kind of like you're edging the person. Like, oh, do you just like go and like just go like this, and then right before the person's like about to climax, then you run somewhere else, and it's like, now I'm left here with like a relational blue balls. Like, is that like, that's sick. So that's literally like how it feels like to me, or it felt like to me. And then it's like, so then when you meet like somebody else who seems to like give you that kind of excitement, who's just, like, then it's like, on second thought, I don't really know if I want to.
No, it's like,
but if you know that, oh, this is going to be probably a one night stand or two week stand kind of thing, and now
twice a year stand.
yeah. Now it's like, okay, I can adjust my expectations to enjoy this. We both get off, here, and then it's like, all right, you can go wherever you like again, and we'll rendezvous once more. But I just, like in those relationships, like, oh, I thought that we were in an actual relationship, like this is like every day kind of thing. Is all of that making sense?
Yeah. No, it's interesting because it's like what's happening there is a mismatch of expectations, right? Because it's like to the ENFP or to the NFP, that is like an actual relationship, and it's like the ironic part is that FI can have a relationship with you without you being present, which is not real. But it's like, oh, they might feel like they saw you yesterday because in their head, they had a 2-hour conversation with you yesterday. Wow. You just weren't there for it, the person.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's like, it's like expectation management is very key with perceiving types. Because I've had the same experience, interestingly, with ESFPs, because I tend, when me and an ESFP meet each other, it's like, oh, we are best friends forever 1 minute later. And it feels like we've known each other our whole lives because we're so similar. That FITE is our auxiliary and tertiary. And it's like I remember I met this ESFP one time traveling, and then we traveled together for like a year. And it was like everyone who met us was like, you guys are you sisters? Have you known each other your whole life? Like we were just completely inseparable for a year. And then we stopped traveling together. And I think I've talked to her like twice since. And it's like the odd time I've kind of been like, oh, I miss that friendship. And it's funny because my partner, who's also an SFP and who like met me during the time when I was best friends with this person, was like, yeah, I think she just forgets that you exist because you're not standing in front of her, which is how it is for like SFPs sometimes.
Yeah.
And it's like, oh yeah, it's not that dissimilar for me. But it's different because it's like, I won't forget someone exists, but I'll just sustain myself on the relationship I have in my head with them. So I'll be thinking about what they would say to this or this, and it feels very real. But until I'm with them in time and space, it can be very easy to forget that I haven't actually talked to this person in like 6 months.
Wow.
But yeah, it's a different way of having relationships.
Wow. Yeah. These are huge epiphanies for me, because yeah, that explains a lot. I don't think I'm capable of doing that. Like I have to like interact with the person to feel like, okay,
that's FD, I think.
Yeah. And then it's like, and that's even like how I decide whether or not to recategorize a person, like demoting the person in a way or upgrading the person in a way. Like, okay, like I'm going to hang out with this person today. And if this person's already like on thin ice with me, like, I don't know, like where our relationship is at, it's like, okay, let me feel out our whole dynamic, but I have to hang out with that person or else I just can't, really decide. So it's like, especially for me, like being an ENFJ, I think it's like my FE and my SE have to like, see like, okay, this is just what it is. This is what the dynamic is. So now I can recategorize that person, or my brain can be like, I don't think that you really need this person in your life. But it can't do that until I have that one last interaction with that person to like light the match in a way. Whereas, like you said, like I agree. I think that FI users are like really capable of being able like, oh yeah, I've been thinking about you, and like I've like, had these like conversations with you like in my head because they like know me well enough to be able to like know like, oh, this is how you're probably going to respond. Although there are also FI users who a lot of times like they'll have a conversation with you in their head and it's like totally just not how you were. It's like, wait, I would not have said that or that or that. You've concluded a lot of different things. It would have been better if you just came to me. But yeah, like when you're like really close with a friend, that makes sense that, oh, you still are having or growing that friendship even with that person, even without that person actually being there, which sounds so foreign to me. That's really, it's cool, but it's also like, wow, how does that work?
Yeah, well, it's funny because it's like, as you're talking, I'm realizing the difference between my INTJ friends and my INFJ friends. Because I'm like, with my INTJ friends, the reason I can kind of collect them and go years and years, and then we catch up twice a year and it's great. And 10 years later, we're still close friends, even though we've only talked twice a year. But I have exactly one friend, like one really close friend who's an INFJ. And I remember I met her during college. And then after college, I went and traveled for a while. And then I moved back to like our college town where she was still living. And I remember like starting to hang out with her again. And I felt like, oh, she's being kind of cold towards me. So I asked her about it and I was like, oh, is everything okay? Like, are we weird? And she was like, no, everything's fine. I'm just trying to remember you. I was like, that is such a funny. It's like for her, her FE needed a lot of real time interaction with me to kind of remember what it felt like to be around me.
Yes.
But to me, that's wild because it's like FI always remembers people. Like, it's like, I remember everything about what it feels like to talk to this person and be around them because especially with SI, it's like I engage with them in my head. So it's like, oh, I remember what it feels like to talk to you, but you don't remember what it feels like to talk to me. So it's like, yeah, she needed that time to kind of reassimilate emotionally to me.
Wow.
Versus my INTJ friends, I think because they also have FI, they never need that. Like they're just kind of like, cool, give me a 5-minute recap of your last 6 months, then let's go into which books we're reading or whatever it is. Wow. And it's like, we don't need that warm-up time again because we've both been having conversations with each other in our heads. So it's like, then once we're in real time, cool, let's hit the ground running. But I've had to learn that it's very different for FE users.
Got you. I have a question on that for like the preliminary to just like comment on that. Like that makes a lot of sense because I could see myself being very similar to your INFJ friend in that way where it's like, again, if I've categorized a person in a certain way, then I can pick up like how you said like the INTJ was because it's like, okay, I get that, this is our dynamic. And so it's not about the quantity of how often we're speaking, but when we do speak, the quality is like very poignant. But when, again, like if that expectation is not there already set, then it's just like, well, now I'm just kind of like running on fumes and everything. And I think that big thing for me is that I pay so much attention to dynamics. So it's like, of course, I'm valuing the person as an individual and everything, but it's almost like I'm paying more attention to not just you as an individual, but like how are we interacting? So if so if we like created this metaphorical child and we called the child relationship, then it's like, well, you have not been here feeding this child, and you can't just say like, oh, I'm feeding it in my head, like you just like ghosted somewhere, and it's like, okay, but let's have an agreement that okay, I'm going to be taking care of the child, and
Denzel wants alimony on his friendships that have gone wrong.
Exactly. Like that's how it's making sense to me in my head. It's like, wait, like we created this, so I'm almost like paying more attention to the child that we created and us co-parenting that dynamic that even more than the person itself. I think I could be wrong, but I feel like that's what's like natural for me. And so then that whole idea of like the person just like being able to like leave, and then it's like if the person just like comes back, then it's like, well, my child doesn't really recognize you. Like, and it's not really like I don't like, and we know that you're the mother or the father, whatever, but we don't really know, like, are you here to stay this time, or are you like, we have to set some type of like expectation so I can be like, okay, this is how it is. You're gonna go see mommy twice a year, and we have and it's not because she hates you, but it's because she has so many other children that she has to take care of. And she loves all of them equally. And she thinks about you all the time, even though she cannot call you every day. And the child can just be like, oh, okay. Yeah, I think that's how it is for me. If I can have that security, like, oh, you don't have the time to call every day, but you do have this child in your head, because what I end up just thinking is that you don't care about the child. You just up and abandon the child. And so now it's like, well, if you abandon the child, then that shows how much you don't really value me. And so therefore, what does that say about me and all this other stuff?
That is okay. This is so funny because it's like, this is one of those times where I'm like, wow, I just so don't know what it feels like to think like that. Because it's like, to me, it's like, okay, I'm kind of seeing it as like, I'm gonna throw another metaphor in there. It's like, okay, if relationships are like an art exhibit, and it's like, to you, it's like every exhibit is an interactive one. So it's like, okay, as long as you're there interacting with it, it's a piece of art. And then when it's not being interacted with, it's not. But for FI users, we look at people as like their own works of art. So it's like, okay, if I have a friendship with like you, Denzel, it's like in my head, even when we're not talking, it's like, oh, you're a piece of art. And it's like, I'll still be kind of from afar, like taking in like posts or whatever's on your mind. And I'm like, oh, now I see this other paintbrush that's there. And it's like, wow, I can still in my mind conjure up that piece of art. And it's like, oh, it's so unique compared to my other friend who's this piece of art, my other friend who's this piece of art. And it's like, I'm always admiring that artwork in my mind. And I don't remember always that and it's like, oh, and then there's times when you go to the art museum and interact with it. And then it's like, okay, now you see more of it. You see like more of it gets revealed to you. But it's like in my mind, all of my friends are these like beautiful works of art. And it's like, I can still remember that and admire that artwork from afar without having to interact with it. Cause there isn't like there's no child in there for me. Like I don't, to cross metaphors, but it's like, yeah, it's just a very different way. Like we admire people as like for their individuality over valuing like the kind of dynamic that gets created between people. We appreciate that in the moment, but it's like the dynamic for us is there for the end goal of seeing more of this person and the piece of art that they are. So it's like, okay, sometimes if I've just like gotten to know someone, I'm like, okay, I understand all these things about you. Now I'm like, oh, I have a beautiful piece of art to admire for a while. And It's like, I'm going to be thinking about my friends and thinking about like the people I form close relationships with. But even if it's a while before we talk again, I still I can still very vividly see and remember them. So it doesn't feel as important to like keep feeding that dynamic. But it's just like, yeah, it's just two totally different ways of relating to our emotions.
Wow. Yeah, that's incredible. Because for me, yeah, that it's like, because I don't want it to be like to make it seem as if like I don't care about the individual. I definitely do. But then it's like, just like you said, it's a different scope where for me, the way that I'm showing that I care about that individual is like the more that I'm feeding our child, which is our relationship, is me showing you like this, how much like I value you as a friend. I value you as a partner or whatever. I'm investing this much into this child kind of thing. And so the less that you're doing that on your end, then it's like, oh, again, like you're not showing me that you really care about me through the child. Yeah. You're just kind of like, so I'm trying to even like process like how that I probably do what you're saying, where it's like just admiring the person, like, you know, like as a work of art. But like, cause I have to like really like sit down and marinate on that. But I know that as of right now, my inclination is to be like, I don't think that I do. Not in the same sense. I think that I definitely am more focused on the dynamic and fostering that dynamic more and more. And that's my way of showing that I love you as a person, because I chose to have a child with you, and I'm continuing to invest in that child. And so then you leaving, it's like, what you know, but wow. So then I guess then my next question going off of that, would you then say that ENFPs have not only the ability, because again, like you're in a romantic relationship, but maybe like in a platonic friendship even, like when does it happen where an ENFP is probably like investing that much, like on like a everyday basis, or does that like not happen? Is it always kind of like, oh no, like I'll do this for like 6 months and then I'm gonna go somewhere else, kind of thing, because just the nature of NE. And even then, I'm also thinking about like how you said like NE is more excited about the idea of
Yeah.
something, and then when it comes to actually like doing it, then it's like and so I was like wondering, like, do you think that that could also play a part? It's like in the beginning of the friendship, it's like, whoa, yeah, like wow, this is gonna be such a fun friendship, and like look how cool of a person you are. And then it's like now when it comes to like, as the Greek would say, pragmatism of building and cultivating that dynamic or that friendship. That's where the ENFP is probably like, I don't know, like that just seems like, yeah.
I think, yeah, the easy answer to that is that if you want to maintain friendships long term as an ENFP, you have to make sure that the circumstances allow for that. So I'll give an example in a minute, but it's like when you said like friendships where you talk every day. I don't think I have any friendships where I talk every day to the person, but I do have my best friend is an INFP, and I talk the most to her, like the most consistently. And we've known each other for, I think, about 15 years, something like that, somewhere in there, 10 to 15 years. And she's the person I've kept the most in touch with in my life. And it's because we have extremely similar processing styles. So it's like both of us don't at all get offended if like she'll leave me 15 voice notes sometimes and I'll listen to them and then not respond, and vice versa. So it's like we both don't get offended at all by the other person, either like being flaky for a bit or like doing their own thing. And then when we get together and talk, it's like so good. So I feel like I've kept the most consistently in touch with her because I never feel this sense of like, oh, I didn't respond to them. Oh no, they're going to like be upset with me, which I feel with a lot of my other friends. So it's like, it can be this very, and it's not healthy, but it's like this thing that a lot of FPs do when it's like, oh, they don't respond to someone because they're feeling a certain way and they need alone time or whatever, but they don't communicate that. And then it's like, oh, they get so like, oh no, I didn't answer them. And so then it perpetuates itself. But yeah, with my INFP best friend, and then I have another close INTP friend who's like very similar. It's like, the ease of communication is very, very clear because like neither of us are annoyed with the other if we need space for a bit. So ironically, those end up being the relationships that I'm the most communicative in because I'm not constantly like judging myself about how I'm communicating. But oh, I had another point here. Oh yeah. So it's like the way to keep up relationships of any form long-term, I think as an ENFP or as an FP, is just to make sure that like you're kind of in an interconnected network with that person. I think that's the reality of it. Cause I'm like, when I think about the relationships I've invested in the most consistently, it's always been when the circumstances were that we saw each other a lot, whether or not we planned to. So like college, for 5 years, I spent all of this time around this certain group of people. And like, it was very easy because they all either lived down the street from me or were in my classes or whatever. And that was a very, very simple thing to do. And then post-college and pre-COVID, I was part of this nomadic community, like this network of people who would decide when to travel together and like where to go. And it was my absolute dream because it was basically like you would live with people for a month. And then you would all go your separate ways. Like, oh, I'll be in Peru next month. I'll be in South Africa. And then this is a very like, my job allowed me to do that, which is great. Not everyone can be a part of something like this, but it's like, then we'd be like, okay, in 3 months, we're going to meet up in, Paraguay or whatever. And it's like, you would have these very intense friendships for like a month where you're doing everything together. And I should also note that my love language is quality time. So like that really plays into all of this for me. But then it's like, okay, we'll go off to our separate things. And then we know we'll meet back up again in like 2 months and have that kind of intense, full-on friendship again. So we don't have to worry so much in the meantime. Like maybe we'll send each other some voice notes, keep each other updated. But at the end of the day, it's like, oh, we know when we'll see each other next. And if we don't, we know it'll be within like a year or two. And just the other day, so the guy who like founded this group of people is an ESFP. And we were all on a group call the other day, and he was saying like, oh, I hope this community lasts for our entire lives. And like, we all like have kids and raise them together, and like, and end up like our kids continue on the community. And I like just like cried after that call, because I was like, that is so beautiful. Because for ENFPs in particular, and I think FPs as a general whole, we really want those long-lasting relationships. Like, I want to look at those people and know, like, when I'm 70 years old, I'm still going to know all of you because I love them so much. But I also know that I get very bogged down by serious relational commitments. So it's like, I get really stressed if I feel like, okay, I have to be in this particular place to stay close to this person. But if I know, like, I have a network of people, and it literally is a network where it's like, even if we're living in different places, we're going to stay connected because we are part of this group of people who knows each other and shares in each other's lives. That's like the beautiful best of both worlds, where it's like, you can both be absent and present at the same time, and like form those long-term relationships while doing what you do best, which is engaging very fully with what's in front of you and like what's happening in real time. So I think that if you can find your way into any sort of network, for some people, like for me, it's digital nomadism, but for other people, it's school. For other people, it's church. For other people, it's like any sort of common interest or theme that connects people. I think that's the best case scenario, because it's like, if you know you're going to see people by accident, it's like, I have a joke, like one of my cousins who's an ESFP, I've been really, really close to my entire life. She's like a sister to me. Like I'm closer to her than anyone else in my family. And we both go through periods where we don't talk very much. And sometimes like one of my friends will ask about that, like, oh, what's going on with Laura? And I'm like, well, it doesn't matter if we don't talk for like a year, because she's my family. Like, I'm always going to know her. There's never going to be a time where I lose touch with her. Like, someone will get married, I'll see her next year, and we'll be best friends again for 3 days. And it's kind of like that when you have a social network. Like, it's like, as long as you know that there will be a point in the future where you'll see them, there's a strong motivation to keep that relationship alive, because it feels more like a living, breathing thing. Literally, like you were saying, like a child, if you know that in the future, there's going to be these set points where you engage. So I think that's like best case scenario for any of the FPs.
Thank you for explaining that, for really breaking that down, because this whole video, this whole like conversation has just been having so many light bulbs for me that I don't even know how to really formulate, because I just have to like go back and allow my NI to process it and then reevaluate all of these different like dynamics. And again, that I had, I was like, wow, did I misinterpret that? Or like, I wonder what would have been differently if I'd like knew this over here, and like, how can I then know this for the future? And then, and like just so many things. I know, like, because it's helping me in this sense, I am positive that it's going to be helping other people as well with their relationships with NFPs, and also to help NFPs who may have that kind of like guilt. Because like I said, like Albany, my INFP friend, who we don't really like talk like everyday kind of thing. And also, yeah, it's not that, again, category. So it's like, I don't expect to talk to anyone like quote unquote like every day. But if that's like established in the beginning, like, oh, that's kind of like how it is, then I just kind of like, maybe that's a judger in me. It's like, okay, I guess this is the nature of that dynamic, at least for right now. And then if we start like, spacing that out to like every week or, every 2 weeks or whatever, then it's like, all right, cool. Like, but it's like a progressive kind of thing. Whereas like I said, like the NFPs that I had known, it just seemed like so dramatically high, like hot, and then super cold. And it's just like, how did that happen? But everything of what you're saying, like, just makes sense. And I think now it's like, okay, in that sense, is it good to then just like tell the ENFP, like while they may have like ghosted or whatever, like kind of like give them like assurance, like, hey, just so you know, like, I don't know, like, because even then that kind of like feels like weird, like, oh, there's like no pressure to respond more quickly, or like, I'm not upset, I know that we haven't talked in a long time, but just thinking of you, missed you, boom, boom, boom. Hopefully, like just giving them some type of assurance to like let them know that there's no bad feelings, or would sending another message overwhelm them, or what?
No, it's all good. It's like, it's funny because I feel like I don't know exactly what the right answer is, because I feel like having FE there is a need for you to like communicate your feelings about whatever the dynamic is. But ironically, I feel like for like what makes me feel very comfortable always re-engaging with my other NP friends after it's been a while is that like no one will even address the dynamic. Like it's like, oh, like my INFP friend will send me 15 voice notes. Let's say I listen to them, I don't respond. And then the next day she just links me an article and it's like, what do you think about this? And then it's like, we both know, like we'll get on a Skype call, we'll talk about the thing that she had talked about and like all have thought about it, whatever, and vice versa. It 100% happens in the opposite direction. But it's like, I actually think that the best way to re-engage with like an NFP or any NP, if it's been a little while and it's feeling weird, is literally just like send them like, oh, I was thinking about, send them thoughts, and their NE will compulsively respond. Like if someone sends me emotional things, like when my INFP friend sends me like a whole bunch of like her feelings, I think a lot about it, but my FI needs a lot of time to assimilate, think about it, be like, oh, what's she probably thinking in like a very big way, like in conjunction to all the other things I know about her. And then a week later, I'll be able to give her like my thoughts on what she said. But with NE, it's instant. So if someone sends me like an article and they're like, what do you think of this? I'll read it and be like, I have 10 thoughts. And it's like, I need to say it immediately. So if you want to just trigger your NE friends into action, you can just send them like some sort of thought or something. And chances are they'll respond to that very quickly. And that will be like a better way to keep the engagement going. Mm-hmm. But on the same side, it's like you need to honor that need for FE that you have. So maybe it just means the order of it happens that way. So it's like, you know, sending them like kind of thoughts or telling them what you're thinking. And that's why like on Twitter, for example, I feel like, oh, I have these people I know on Twitter who I don't really know, but it's like, oh, I feel connected to you as a friend, even when people talk, because it's like we're engaging with each other's thoughts on Twitter all the time. Yeah. So it's like, yeah, anything, basically, if you can send your friends tweets as messages, do that, and they will be like happy that you thought of them. Because NE, like someone sharing their thoughts is the most important thing they can share. So it's like if you're sharing your thoughts with them, then that's like a way to keep a friendship very like happy and alive to us.
Wow. Yeah, I can't emphasize how helpful this whole conversation has been for me.
Likewise.
Someone like I don't share any of these functions, and so and I think about relationships almost totally differently. So seeing this is just, I've been thinking of several different people in my life, both ENFPs and INFPs, that I'm just always trying to like err between like, okay, I don't want to bother them or overwhelm them, but I maybe because I'm not reaching out in this way, then that's allowing the flame to die even more. But then maybe, I don't know, they're going to come back when this, like, I don't know. So like, I just probably like overanalyze or overthink all of that, but like just knowing like, oh, this is probably what's going on in their head. And this is how they're viewing it. And yeah, that all just really helps. Like I have so much to post-process right now, but thank you so much. And
same, man.
Quick side comment. Yeah, you're right. Like Twitter, because you are actually an ENFP that I never felt that way from. Like even when we had stopped, you know, doing the live streams and everything, like I never really felt like, oh, me and Heidi just like ghosted me or anything like that, or like we're no longer friends like that. So just in case if there's even like 1% thought like, oh, I wonder if Denzel felt that way. Like with you, I think because of Twitter, my FE was like fulfilled and knowing like, oh, she responded to this tweet and it seemed fine. Like, so like, like we're engaging in this way. So it's like, oh, okay, like we are still somewhat connected, even if we have not hopped on a video chat or we have not even like direct messaged in a while. And I felt comfortable to just like, you know, hit you up. Whereas like with certain friends, it's like, I haven't received a text message or a call. I haven't seen you in person or anything. And so then it's just kind of like, it leaves more room to like fill in that gap with like assumptions. Like, are we cool even? Like, did they forget about me, or did they not forget about me, but they're avoiding me? And then if I ask them if they're avoiding me, that can make things awkward. But then did they hear something about? So you just start overthinking like all this stuff when really they've been having conversations with you the whole time. You just weren't part of the conversation.
It's helpful for me to remember that FE really needs that emotional sharing, or else it doesn't know where you're at. Because to me, it's like, oh, if I'm engaging with this person in any form, or like I send them an idea or something, it's like it's implied to them in my mind that like I still feel very like fondly and want to have a relationship with them, but it might not be implied to them. So that's very helpful. And it's also like, oh, I'm just having an aha moment about social networks in general, because it's like, you know, there's a lot of problems that come along with like us all being this plugged in and this engaged, but I think there's also a lot of beauty in it, because it's like I've had probably like 5 completely unrelated people joke to me that like, Heidi, your love language is Twitter. And it's like, it is, because it's like, when I have a real life friend who then becomes my Twitter friend, it's the best feeling in the world, because I know now I'm always going to have touch points with this person, because it's like, oh, even if we don't consciously like reach out and connect because I'm off traveling or whatever, I'm going to see their posts and I'm going to be like, oh, that's a cool thought, I'll respond to it. And it's like, or other people, like our mutuals, will be having a conversation and I'll be like, even like seeing them interact with other people makes me feel like I'm kind of in a room with them. So it's like, that is the beauty of social networks too, online, is like, it's kind of a virtual community where it's like you keep learning about people even when you're not in real time interacting with them.
Wow. Yeah. Got you. That was awesome. Well, Heidi, thank you so much for even, this is like video number 2 for this, for like these past 2 weeks. And both conversations have just been absolutely riveting. And I've just been learning like so much. I've just been like reflecting on so much. And thank you just for featuring on my channel once again and being able to talk about all of this. And before we log off, do you mind just plugging like where people can find you? And just again, like, you know, when even like, because once again, I know that you're opening season soon for like boot camp. So can you give like any of the details about that as well, just for people who might be curious?
Yeah, totally. So if you want to be part of my Twitter family and know me for the rest of our lives, you can find me at Heidi Priebe 1. So the number 1, and that's spelled HEIDI PRIEBE 1. And for the boot camp, so we actually have a semester open currently. So we're doing a self-study semester this winter, which means that you can join at any point, actually any point in 2021, and you can get the course access on your own. So we're not doing community or coaching at this time. We might run another one later this year. But currently, in order to keep things really accessible, you can go to HeidiPriebe.com and you can check out those programs, and everything gets delivered to you through video modules and through worksheets that you complete on your own time. And you can interact with other participants in the comments section. We have, the ENFP one has turned into a giant life coaching session in the comments, as you can imagine. Like, I just log on every day and it's like, people are just like counseling each other, like giving each other advice, like pumping each other up for things. So it's really cute. It's a lot of fun, because they don't even have like Slack, but they're just finding a way to connect anyways. So yeah, it's a lot of fun, and there are other people on there who are kind of like sharing your struggles and challenges that you can connect with. And yeah, that's available for registration at any point in 2021. So that's HeidiPriebe.com.
Awesome. Yeah. And I will also note real quick, at least this is how it happened for me. I'd say put the www.HeidiPriebe.
Oh yeah, my site has had a weird issue with that for some browsers. So yeah, throw the www dot in front of that. I think it's working properly again.
Yeah.
But it might just be my cookies. But yeah, if it doesn't work, make sure you're typing the www dot.
Right. Yeah. But awesome. Cool. Thanks. And make sure to also find Heidi on YouTube. Her
That's right.
showing up over here. I
forgot about that. Yeah, I put out new YouTube videos once a week now.
Yeah.
So yeah.
And they've been great, by the way. I've been watching them, and I'm just like so excited for more of what you're gonna be putting out. So definitely go and subscribe to her. Our SPA Sigma videos, for those of you who have not seen them, are still also available. And even our first video that we did, properly profiling people, you can definitely find that literally just by typing that in on YouTube. But yeah, Heidi, thanks once again for featuring. We're definitely gonna have you again. And done.